No, go ahead.
Oh my God. Good. You kill me. Good morning.
It's only a 15-second loop.
I should be known as the queen of.
I tried something new today.
What?
I tried something new today.
I have no sound through my earphones.
Come on. Why?
I have no sound through my earphones.
We should have checked that.
Okay. First of all, good morning. Welcome to your daily Gameface. I'm Dr. Kim Lannon, and thank you, Lou, for messing up my intro again. And also, I did try to check my earphones, but you were la-laing around, even though you did go get me Advil because I have a screaming headache for like the 7th time in a week. And I have no sound.
Did you try your volume control?
You
weren't snapped in.
It wasn't snapped in.
Yeah. Now you have sound.
Now I have sound.
Yep.
Well, that was an epic fail of an intro, but thanks.
Well, that's part. Oh no, I'm not going to get into it because I screwed up. So.
Were you going to say you were going to say it was my fault? Thank you.
No. I was going to say that's why I asked if you were ready.
Well, I was ready, but I had no idea that I had no sound. Anyway, okay. And then I also came in and said hello to you, and then was told that my hello was insufficient.
No.
My hello.
You misrepresented that whole story.
No.
We need tape.
No, I said hello, and you were like, "What's wrong with you?" And then you said, "You're on time." So I was like, "Oh, wow!" There was a lot going on there.
That's such a CNN way of presenting that.
Well, I'd rather be CNN than Fox. Don't dish it out if you can't take it back.
I can take it.
Mm-hmm. So anyway, good morning.
Good morning.
I do. I have a raging headache for like the 7th time in a week.
I know. I medicated you.
Thank you. You were one short though, but we're hoping this will kick in shortly. It's like I have so many things. Anyway. Oh, good Lord. So anyway, I'm hoping that we have some people on today. I mean, lots of people were talking about the past 3 shows. Nice. So I thought that I would I'm bringing it to a new level. I have gone into depth further, and I thought I would talk today about emotionally immature people. There's the topic for the day, and I just thought I would jump right into talking about, because it's actually a thing, because it goes on the line of narcissistic people, and there's a lot of them in the world these days, and you just look at the news and you can see it everywhere. So I just thought, wow, this is a great time to really flesh out the I'm going to call it the national epidemic of emotionally immature people, but it's actually just like a relational thing. But so what is an emotional? I'm jumping right in, by the way.
Go right ahead.
And, I mean, we could talk all about like our weekends and all those things, but I just figured I got a lot of material today.
That's right.
So
let's get to it.
Okay, so let's get to it. So emotionally immature people, all right, and sort of the last 3 weeks before this, we're talking about like toxicity and people being in toxic relationships and toxic work relationships and all that. But let's really get down to the brass tacks of like who these people are. Just bring it right down to the bottom. So, you can I call them, some clinicians and some writers and whatever talk about them as emotionally immature people. I talk about them as emotionally fractured people. Mm-hmm. So I'll probably intertwine them because I typically use the word fractured, just because of the damages that happen and this is what causes it, et cetera. But I'm going to kind of go through it. I'm probably not going to get to everything I want to talk to you about today, everybody, but I'm going to probably break it into 2 parts. And so today you get this part, and then next week you'll get the next part.
Yes.
Okay. So, emotionally immature people. It comes from like a line of development. You know how we develop intellectually, we develop socially, we develop like academically, spiritually, and all these things, right? And we adapt to a sort of normal level of development, right? When we talk about emotional development, that's a separate line of development. Like those, it's a very separate line. It's people. If you read some things, especially in pop psych kind of stuff. No,
pop psych.
Yeah, pop psychology.
Yeah.
Like if you read pop psychology stuff in like contemporary like self-help books, they kind of glaze over it and think of it really as like, they kind of gloss in out of that concept, and but there's books written on emotional intelligence for a reason, right? There's we have intelligences, and some people are not emotionally intelligent. But this is like a bigger piece that I really wanted to frame out, because we did 3 weeks in a row of I just talked specifically about those tendencies and toxicities and people in general, but really bringing it down to like the person and who they are, right? So so it is a separate line of development when we talk about an emotionally immature person. And the thing about the emotionally intelligent person is they're so strikingly obvious, if you're good at reading people, right? They're smart, right?
Yep.
Right. You meet them smart, very bright, super charming, like just charm the socks off you kind of thing, and very socially skilled. They're those people that you meet and you're like, oh, I just want to be friends with them. They're so much fun. They're like, and they're the light of the room. They're just, and then when I say but, I see it in beaming lights with like a ticker tape of like lights running around it in bright red and like, siren like red.
Yep.
Going, but right. Emotionally, they're very mature. They're very poor at their maturity. Like the actual emotional maturity behind the curtain is super poor, like deficited completely. And that doesn't mean there's no accountability or responsibility taking, but
this is a matter of degrees.
Well, it's on a continuum, but we're talking about like there are a lot of emotionally immature people. And so, it's a matter of degrees, but you can have like some people but we're talking like there's a lot of people that are really at this heavier level of the developmental scale. And when you see an emotionally mature person under stress, there's 2 ways you see them usually for their maturity or immaturity. In 2 ways. You see how they are under stress, and you see them in relationship. And so how you see a person under stress, I mean, obviously you don't see, if I see you under stress or you see me under stress, that isn't who we are normally, right? We don't like, that's, because why? Because we know how to modulate. We know how to come back into the world. We know how to be like, okay, in our stressful times, this is how it is for those moments. But then we can kind of regain, and people can see us like, oh, that's not who they are. You'd never, you never take them for that when they're under stress, because in their relationship, in their work environment, or in their actual intimate relationship, which is what we talk about in psychology. And most of the time it's in the intimacy relationships of like being close to a significant other. We don't see emotional maturity fall off the radar. We see it as keeping connected. So when you see someone in stress, you're like, oh, well, they're having a moment and then they come back. But with an emotionally immature person or a fractured person, their stress level is more, I call it more like they temper tantrum. They're a temper tantrumer. And then an emotionally immature person in a relationship is very similar, but it has a lot of different little like fallout subsets that come with it. Okay. And so when you're under stress with immaturity, or when you're in a relationship that's supposed to be intimate and connected, the negativity, we'll call it the toxicity, shows itself. It shows itself very brightly. There's the red thing going around it, right? And so the normal looking is obvious, right? But at home, like out in the world, the normal looking looks fine. But at home, in relationships, the people that you live with really get to see the emotional immaturity in someone. They really get to see the toxicity. Why? Because people, when they go home, for lack of better, and most writing that talks about this in detail, especially contemporary, they don't care. They don't care that you see it. They care that the outside world sees this package that makes them look a certain way. But at home, if you're in relationship to an emotionally immature person, that person doesn't care what you see. They will give you all the bad stuff. They will show you everything that's unhealthy, that's malicious, that's not always the nicest person, with the caveat that they think that they are wonderful. And because what they're doing is they're bringing in their social persona of how they appear to be to the world and what they get validated for, and then come into the backside in the home and be like, and they give you the worst, right? So they live with this really to sort of smoke and mirror you or snow you. It's kind of like, I have very specific examples of like growing up, and I would say something about certain family members, and they'd be like, "Oh my God, your so and so is like that. They're so great. They're just so sweet. They're so wonderful. They're so," right.
Yep.
That's the kind of an emotionally immature person will get that kind of reaction to your description of them when you say, "Well, they're not quite like that."
Yeah.
Or like when you're out with a spouse or a significant other, they're like, "Oh my God, your husband's so funny. He's so great. He's so loving. He must be so wonderful at home." And he's not, right?
Yeah,
Or
right.
she's not. It's usually not. It's very rarely to talk about these things, even in writing, about females being more like this. This is much more men, unfortunately. Doesn't mean that there aren't women like this, but you will find more that it's a male fracture, just because of the way that we're socialized in raising boys and men in this country. It's not just here, but I'm sticking to the US. So when you hear those kind of phrases, it's like, "Oh, they're so wonderful," and all those things. The home curtain, the thing behind the curtain at home, is not that. The family life at home doesn't get that. The spouse doesn't get that. The girlfriend doesn't get that. Or whoever else is on that other side, because that's where they can let their guard down and not have to be in the spotlight of who they want you to see. They're in the spotlight of who they really are.
Yeah.
And that becomes a really interesting little dynamic there. And so when they say things like, "Oh, he's such a great guy, and you just must be so lucky," and sometimes you'll see people like kind of roll their eyes. That was one of the best things I think I've said before. One of my supervisors, 25, almost 30 years ago, 30 years ago now. God, I keep thinking it's 25, 30 years ago. God rest his soul. He's passed away now. Would say to me, when you're in front of pathology and it's personality disordered, if you have to roll your eyes, whether it's in front of them or in your own head to yourself, you're with a narcissist. You're with someone that's really histrionic, which means overly dramatic, or you're with a narcissist, right? When they're out in public and people think it's funny and they think it's wonderful and they think all that, that you're with an emotionally immature person, because it's just like, it's painful, because when you're home, it's all that part is always on. And then usually the gaslighting begins with, "Oh, it's just a joke." And when someone says something to you that's immature from an emotionally immature person, like, "Oh, I was just kidding. Well, you're taking it too hard." What they're really trying to say to you is, "I don't have the investment to give to you that makes it worthwhile to own that I hurt your feelings, or that I said something that was rude or inconsiderate." So instead, what they do is they gaslight you with, "It's just a joke. You need to leave me alone. I'm just being funny." It's not funny, right? But because they get so validated in their lifetime growing up through the jokesters and the sarcastic stuff and the funny person stuff out in the world, then the emotional immaturity gets reinforced neurologically, especially in neuroatypical people who vie for that to fill them up. It's like it's the cup filler, right?
Yep.
Any thoughts so far? You're just saying yes.
No, I'm just wondering, we're all on this. You said a continuum, and I think we all do this to an extent, but obviously you can tell when it's problematic.
Yes, exactly.
But we all have a public persona.
Well,
You're
yes.
describing my mother to a T, by the way, but that's a whole nother
yes.
story.
Well, yeah. Well, it will get probably better for you. I'll give you more. So, well, yeah, everyone has little pieces. I mean, this is like anybody. Everyone has narcissism. Everyone has histrionics. Everyone has dependency. Like, it's a matter of where it sits on the continuum. And when we really
whether it's problematic,
whether it's pathological or problematic or on that like spectrum. And I'm seeing more and more of the problematic pathological stuff, just by nature and what's going on around us. And so
I'm probably jumping ahead, but isn't this generational? Haven't we, if you are this, you kind of raise this. Generally speaking, you create that environment where this becomes possible.
So you do create the environment.
You at least model it.
I am gonna talk about that. So yes, it is. I wouldn't say it's generational, but I would say it's more, because I don't think it's never not been there. I think, in terms of like, I think it's just the way it shows up. Good morning, Kate. It's just the way it shows up and how it shows up within a family who's taught it. And I'm going to talk actually about how it's created. But it is created, and not in the traditional sense of psychology, talking about parental blame. It's created in the parenting of or the lack of parenting or the neglected parenting style, because it's an attachment issue, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. Kate's saying hi, that she hopes I have a great day. You too, Kate. So going back to it, it doesn't really show up in particular until really specific conditions are present. So say you have a work environment and person's in their new position and everything's going great. It won't show up in the beginning. You won't see it in the beginning. You'll see it as it starts getting further and further, and the person becomes problematic because that behavior and that personality starts to rub other personalities. It starts to become a problem. It becomes the over the top person in the job, and the person usually, I don't know what the actual statistics are, but when I was doing some research on this, it's often that people tap out between like 3 to 10 years of a job, usually not on the 10-year side. It's usually like 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
People just get sick of them, and they do enough damage that they have warnings. They have other things that become personality conflicts and deficits in the place, but people still be like, nice guy, great guy, but just too much, just over the top, right? So here's sort of talking, we're going to get into the characteristics of that emotionally immature person. Okay. So one, very egocentric. Now that does not mean like I don't know what you might think that means, but most people, when I say egocentric, I get an eye roll because people get, that's old school like talk, but it's actually really contemporary now. It's very you-centered. It's very the person-centered. It's very much about them, very self-preoccupied. And one way you know that the person is that way is when you bring it up in terms of like a relational thing. Like if you're in a relationship with someone and say you're very full of yourself, the person goes into denial immediately. Yeah. They're on the offense. They don't get defensive necessarily right away. They get offensive to play a game. It becomes a game, right? Because they don't want to hear that they are egocentric, but they are. They're very preoccupied with themselves. What's in it for them? What are they going to gain from it? What are you going to do for me? And they will be very good at being like, I'm not like that. How could you say that about me? That's not who I am. If you don't want to do those things for me, you don't have to. If you hear that right away, there's a red flag, because that is them being offense and defense at the same time, right? And they're trying to convince you in those little moments at the beginning of the love bombing, essentially, or the initial work phase of their job, that I'm not preoccupied with myself. I'm just trying to like be the best person I am, and I'm a really good person. Nobody says that these people aren't good people. It's a matter of they're damaged and fractured, and they don't see it. They don't want to see it, and they're likely not going to see it. These are people that don't show up in my office. These are people that don't show up in other people's offices unless they're really pushed to the wall to have to. And even then, for them to have to let that guard down, to be able to see that they are preoccupied with self and ego driven, their reality manager, which is the ego, their egocentric means that their reality center is off. They are driven by a very distorted, very delusional base, period. That's just the way the characteristic is, right?
And they get skilled at putting forth the personality as a benefit for you, when really it's based on a goal that they're trying to reach.
And they loop you in to get you into it so that you become part of it, because you become sort of part of their shtick.
Yep.
Right. And not much of any appreciation that other people are real inside. This is a big piece. They have feelings. This is the best way I can describe it. They have feelings. They have thoughts. But to think that another person has a thought or a feeling is intellectually, they know that that's there, but to actually feel it or to know that another person actually, it's like a fantasy. Like, I'm the one that has the feelings. I'm the one that has the thoughts. I'm either a victim. I'm either a martyr. I'm either being persecuted. I'm either being like, and I can't possibly think that you might have that too. I mean, on an intellectual level, if someone asked you, yes, I would say yes, but that doesn't actually mean I know that, right? I like integrate it. And they see people. So people who are immature like this, they'll see other people like me or you as like a character in a movie. Like we're not real. Like, do you know what I'm saying?
I'm not sure. I keep going.
So like the person who is immature and emotionally immature, they see themselves as real, but everyone else is not real. They're playing a part in their own story.
Yeah.
They're like an actor or in a play with them. They're just there to grab the line and just react. That's what they look for. Bad acting is reaction. Good acting is getting a response from what you're hearing because you have active listening. When you have an emotionally immature person, they wait for you to react because that fills them up to be able to spawn more of their bad acting, to be able to go at you and to be able to maneuver you. So that leads to the characteristic of they have almost no empathy, or they have poor empathy, but they know how to pretend like they have it when they need to.
Yes.
They are very good at putting on a show.
Manipulative empathy.
It's manipulative. I like the word maneuvering. They will maneuver you into making you think, especially at the beginning of a relationship, especially at the beginning of a work relationship. They will make you think that they have the package, that they understand, that they can feel what you feel, that they can feel what others feel, when in fact, they cannot feel what you feel. They cannot imagine what you feel. They don't try to imagine how you feel. And they cannot mentalize that you have other thoughts other than what they are thinking, because they don't ever come outside of that realm. Now they'll say, and I've known many people like this, what's the matter? Oh,
Kate.
You go, girl.
Kate's telling me to lock in.
Oh, that's good. I'm glad. Thank you, Kate. So they will say that they do, and they can come up with the information on some heady level if needed. But if you're talking to someone relationally, or you're talking to someone in a therapy session about this, and you ask them, well, so tell me, what is it that you think he or she feels? Or what? It's usually, I don't know.
Yeah.
Or it's a guess. It's like, it's usually a litany of a transactional checklist, like dismissed. You get.
They don't understand it. They just kind of record it.
They've recorded it. They've figured it out over the years to know what to plug in as the word or the words, and then it's like, did I get the boxes right? And by the time you're into a full blown, intense long-term relationship or a work environment relationship, it becomes so intense that it becomes annoying to other people because it's a lot of pressure.
When you ask that, does it show up as an ego opportunity? Because most people will they'll put you down, your opinion down, if they don't understand it or it doesn't align with theirs, because it helps boost their ego.
Yes. Oh, that was so well said. Exactly what happens if it doesn't align. So when you do not align with an emotionally immature person, it breaks them. It breaks their cycle of being able to manage, and they do all the techniques of, they either silent treatment you, they gaslight you, they will distort what you've said, they'll revise history. These are the things that happen when it doesn't align with what they think or feel, or how they think or feel about themselves. They see themselves as a really good person, a provider, a loving person, an empathic person, all those things, and you tell them that they're not, and it blows them up. They just lose their minds and go into a totally different defense mode.
But you're not telling them they're not. All you're doing is, I think about that a little differently.
Exactly, but that's not how they hear it.
Yeah,
in their head, their perception is
diminishing them.
That remember, it's always egocentric. It's always about being victimized, persecuted, attack on them, and they've already got the narrative in their head before you even speak. You're screwed before you even out of the gate, essentially. Okay. So the next,
oftentimes they're inviting disagreement
for
that purpose.
Well, so it's not even oftentimes. That's how they survive. People that have the emotional immaturity survive in chaos. They create a chaotic environment to keep the homeostasis / balance. That's what that means. They keep their balance inside by creating a problem, and then will deny that they've done that because they know that makes them look crazy or pathological or bad.
Yep.
But they will deny that that's actually happening while they're doing it. Right?
Yep.
I always say they'll apologize for the behavior as they're doing the behavior while they're apologizing for it. Like seriously, that's what they do. Right? Okay. Next characteristic: very poor self-reflectors. Here's the thing: they'll say they're great at self-reflection. They'll look on the surface like they can reflect. And you can see, like, especially when you first meet, this is like that love bombing stage, especially when you first meet someone. They'll look like they have the ability to really understand and reflect and think about what you're saying and have great insight. But in reality, they are probably not asking themselves if they caused the problem or if they actually hurt someone, because that would never occur to them. They can't fathom that would actually be there. That's a personal reflection that's just not accessible.
Yep.
So when faced with the fact that they might have hurt someone's feelings or that they caused a problem, they will not self-reflect. They will externalize, which, I've talked about this hundreds of times over the past 5 years, right? They will externalize and project out what goes on in their lives as if, they have to turn it on you. Like, it's no longer, it's the Darvo effect, right?
Yeah.
They'll turn it around and be like, but I don't feel good, or I have anxiety, or I'm not doing well. It's always something, then it turns right inward on them, but it's externalized out too. But this thing out here is the problem, which makes it really hard for them to change, because like psychiatric patients or psychological patients, usually in my practice will ask themselves questions like, what did I do? What could I do differently? And they'll have personal curiosity and how cause and effect happen, and then how to change and what to change, because they don't want to repeat that. People in the emotional immaturity will tell you that they want that because it's the right thing to say.
Right.
They won't do it though. 1, because they don't want to do it. 2, it's too hard to do it. 3, they don't know how to do it. And 4, it's very painful and it's a lot of work. So there's 5 things that are like so overwhelming to that person. And just think, if you're not a mature person, how do you handle one of those things, let alone 5? Yeah. You have to actually have patience and skill and support. And you don't have that. Why? Because you didn't have that growing up. You weren't modeled that. And
it's where the victim mentality comes in, because
right.
It's all about externalizing the problem as
right.
opposed to taking responsibility for the control you have over your outcomes.
Yes.
Because that's hard work.
It is. And to Kate's point, Kate actually brings up a really good point of what you just said. So she just says, this is coordinated to the prefrontal cortex and the ventral striatum, is it not? Yes, it actually is. So what a great question, or a great comment, because the prefrontal cortex and the ventral striatum are the places in the brain, if we just talk structurally, where all of this would sit. And one could argue that, there's underdevelopment of this, which leads to immaturity, because it wasn't developed in childhood around this. You weren't shown empathy. You weren't shown the nurturing and the attachment that's secure enough to actually build the prefrontal cortex and the ventral striatum to actually function as a self-reflecting, empathetic, loving, kind human being from the natural spaces. It's forced. So awesome, Kate. That was really good.
This biological aspect is nurture, not nature.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is all nurture in this way. And so when I talk about all this, it leads to that level of emotional intimacy that is really poor. These are people that have really shitty emotional intimacy relationships. Doesn't mean that they can't have better, but in general, these are the ones that, like, if you know now, if you know what you know now and you should have known it before, this is hard to know, because you have to be able to know these signs working into do you hire someone and then 2 years later find out this person's a total disaster and can't manage people or can't lead, or you're in a relationship with someone and, how do you know that the person can't self-reflect if they're good on the front of looking socially adept and looking really fun and right. So what it leads to, though, is that they're afraid of emotional intimacy because they're not nurtured into emotional intimacy. When you try to get close to a person or get them to have like in-depth intellectual conversations or in-depth emotional conversations, either way, whether it's just about something outside of, something superfluous like food or the weather or whatever, these people become very quippy. They'll brush you off. They won't go into any kind of depth space. They kind of get into this dismissive role, and they can get very angry, and there's the temper tantrum because they don't know how to get there. For some, and some don't want to go there. So you have the combination of, I don't really want to go there because that's too much work. And what the message is telling you as either an employer or as a wife or a spouse is, you're really not worthwhile for me to go there. And it's too much effort because I'd rather just talk about like, baking cookies. Like, and that's so unfulfilling because you're talking to an emotionally immature person that's how they were talked to. They weren't given the respect, and they didn't. I'm so glad Kate brought that up because it's such a good point. They weren't given all the things that actually build the developmental structures in the brain to be able to do what's being asked of them. Yeah. So they have compensated by covering this up with a fake facade to be able to do it. And it's, it doesn't really work, but it does for some people, but then you get found out because you have to look behind the curtain and they don't like that. Right. So it becomes, I call it being, it's tragic in relationships because it's the death of many relationships because the people that are emotionally immature don't want to do the work, think that it's not them, it's the other people. They'll pathologize the other person in the relationship, or they'll pathologize and externalize it. It's the job's fault. It's the work environment, and I do bring these two things up because they're very similar. The things that happen in a marriage or in a relationship are the things that happen at work with these people. Yep. So it's very similar. So I cross over with them. It's super tragic for the people that are on the backside, the receiving end, because you lose out on potentially a really good employee at one level, but you also lose out on a quality person that just doesn't see it.
But it goes back to last week's show, is that you are that person often for a reason.
Say it again.
It goes back to last week's show about examining your role in these relationships, because if you were in those relationships, especially repeatedly, you probably have a role in it. You were... Well, you weren't a target, but you matched it well, so you accepted the behavior.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about that too, because it was a tie-in from last week too, is that you end up pulling for it, right? And, and you don't always, you may end up with one person like this in your life, and then you don't realize it until further in because you haven't had enough experience with it, right? So we're talking about, being afraid of emotional intimacy with people who are like this. These people interpret reality on how it feels. I want to emphasize that. They interpret their reality. Their reality manager is everything. And I say everything, I mean everything with capital E. Everything is dictated to them on how it feels. They react, respond, and do everything on how they think it feels versus the reality of what it is, right? I say one thing, you say one thing. They've already created a feeling. They react from the feeling, not from what was said. They create a narrative, and that's where the delusional distortions come in, and oftentimes revision history, because they believe one thing because they're coming off of a base of already have created a feeling, and then they react completely out of the feeling, right? So they interpret reality based on how it feels to them. Mm-hmm. And then so if it feels like there's something against them, and if they feel like the way that they heard it made them feel a certain way, it's fact. It becomes fact. And there's the FACT with the big red lights again, right? It's their reality is fact. Your reality, even if you say to them, that's not what I said, that's not what I heard, that's not how it came out, that they don't hear that. They only hear what they feel, which is, I don't feel good. I don't like it. I feel like you're attacking me. You're criticizing me. You're being mean to me. You don't appreciate me. Can't you see I cooked you dinner? Like, the feeling is their fact, right? So Kate's on a roll. This is good. Perception versus reality, or perception versus deception, right?
Oh, interesting.
So that's true. So perception versus reality is like a very common theme in psychology, but perception versus deception. Emotionally mature people have pretty spot on perception and perceptual skill. Emotionally mature people will have incredibly deceptive delusions or distortions or falsifying their own truth because they're not doing it off of like what they hear. They're doing it off of what they feel. They're very feeling only. And the feeling isn't actually necessarily what's happening in the moment. The feeling is generated from like that that cortex thing that Kate was mentioning earlier that comes from childhood, that's been it's been shaped and formed into, if it looks like a duck, it must be a duck, and therefore it's all a duck, and therefore it all feels the same way, right?
Yep.
So I have no idea what she's saying now, but I'm moving along. So I have no idea. What is she saying now?
I said my 105 and AP Psych is
shining
right now
through.
shining through in this podcast.
Well, I'm so glad.
We hit her in her.
I know we hit her on her good
AP
spot,
Psych.
right? So, so if a person that's in this space feels criticized, or if this person feels attacked, and that's how they're reacting, right? Even when it's not been said, or
by the way,
or
it's
the
not,
content is there. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, it's not technique when they feel this. It's
No.
what they actually
Feel.
their reality.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a tactical strategy that they're using. It's actually reactive. It's a reactive attachment to the feeling that they already have, that then they're just projecting out onto you. So they use the feeling like a child would use their feeling. And that's why you teach this to children in the beginning, is because you teach children how to regulate themselves off of their feeling, because children do this. This is a skill. This is why now this is where your question from before comes in. Children are supposed to do this. Children do this. And we as adults or parents or primary caregivers, we teach children, and we're supposed to, as good parents or good nurturers, really young, like between the ages of 0 and 6, we teach them how to not just go off of their feeling, which is not the same as intuition. We're talking how to not be overly reactive and dysregulated. But children who become adults that are immature like this are not given emotional regulatory systems. They are left to their own devices. They are often dysregulated by the parent or the parents, or they're encouraged, or they are just not, it's just not addressed, right? So it's very neglectful, and it's an environment where that child isn't told that their reality is not matching what the reality of intellect reality is, that they are let to believe that the emotional reaction is totally appropriate to what the reality of the situation is, when it's not. And so you see, that's where you see a lot of kids being dysregulated a lot. And we work, child psych has done a huge thing in the past couple decades about really getting kids to be more self-aware and getting more in touch with themselves. And people will make fun of that, but this is why, because we've had so many people become pathologically damaged and fractured because of this stuff. And so we're trying to get people to match their reality of what's internal to external, so that it matches the world around them, so that it's not so mismatched. Unfortunately, those pieces make a person really immature and can't effectively do life based on how things feel. And so therefore, because they try to do everything based on how things feel, they end up falling short. So you'll often see a lot of failures. You don't see as academically strong, people. They might be, but you just don't see it fall out as academically strong. You'll see someone do amazing at their job, but they won't be able to sustain it for very long. I had a colleague of mine years ago say to someone, you're able to hit it out of the park, but then you never round the bases. Right. And I love that, because it's really speaks to this emotionally immature person, is that they are so immature that they can do all the feeling, but they don't have anything around it that's reality to support it, to be able to make them feel like, okay, we need to be objective. We need to have our reality based outside of being egocentric and outside of distortion. We have to come into, something that's observing of what the reality is. But what happens to children is that they're taught that, when left to their own devices, which is what happens, that they sit with their distortions. They sit with the narrative that nobody corrects. They sit with, whether it's, a trauma, it could be an actual trauma. It could be just pure emotional neglect of like a parent just missing the mark. Maybe they're not there. You see this a lot in addictive homes. You see this a lot in alcoholic homes. The parents are so absentee because one is either one or both are in the ism, or one is in the ism and the other parent's protecting it. And so the child's reality is so distorted that they have to create a buffer around themselves that never matures them up, because they are learning how to mature themselves up, and they never get there because there's no one helping them regulate what's real.
You just I think you hit on it a couple seconds ago, because I want to check. It's back to the observer position, isn't it?
Yes.
Because,
yes.
And my kids are rolling their eyes somewhere because I hit them with this so often. The brain is barking. Your emotions are barking, and you can freak out to that, or you can take a step back and see what it's all about, and see whether that barking is justified or not, and make decisions based on that. It's about being able to observe that emotional reaction and regulate it.
And so, yes. And so that's what it really comes down to, is doing that. And if a person's emotionally immature, one, they have to be able to see that. A lot of times they can't see it. Yeah. And if they do, they don't want to regulate it because it's a fear. It comes out of fear. And so they adjust their reaction.
Because if they regulate it, it may shine the light on them and where they messed up.
And then they don't know how, because they weren't taught how to correct for that in youth, because their parents fell, unfortunately, the parenting on this, not to blame them, but the parenting fell down.
Yeah.
Like whoever was taking care of them didn't correct for that. They're left to their own devices to adjust the reality so it's not upsetting to them.
Well, again, this is where I think it becomes generational. You and I were raised Irish.
Right.
This problem was there a lot.
Right.
Didn't have the skill set to pass it on. Skill set onto you.
Right. Yeah. And I had a yummy person, so I had my yummy person that was not like this. And I know exactly, because when I was doing all this work, and I've been thinking about this for years, my yummy person negated all of that, because if I had been left with no yummy person, I could see where I would be.
And in doing so, created your observer position, allowed you to regulate.
Because she was a really good observer position.
Yeah.
And she always would put things in check. Right. So going back to this, so what a person does is they adjust their reality so it's not upsetting to them, but they won't adjust it to help you once they've created a problem for you or hurt you or been egregious towards you. They'll adjust for themselves so they're not upset. And so what will they do? They'll deny things. They'll dismiss things. They'll distort. They'll say, it never happened. I never said that. They turn it on you. They'll accuse you. And if they don't want to deal with it, they just won't deal. They'll literally walk away. They're abandoners. They'll just be like, they'll blow up, have their temper tantrum, make it feel as if it's you, and then walk away. And then you're left, if you don't have the smarts about you to be like, it's not my problem, which a lot of people are stuck with, like, what did I do? And you're pulled right back into that cycle of like, you're part of it, because then you start participating in it. Like, oh, I didn't mean to do that. Maybe I won't upset them next time. You have nothing to do with that. Just know that you have not one thing to do with putting them, you have choices. You can hang on to their damage and become part of the damage, or you can just be like, I'm not hanging on to your damage. You want to have a temper tantrum instead of checking in and being like an adult and being civil and being all those things. If you don't, then you're out, right? You're out. You want to walk away, you keep walking away. Well, you're eventually not coming back over and over to this person that you started with that was doing this with you. Because eventually, if you learn in the relationship or in a work environment, they're either in a work environment, they're getting fired, and in a home environment, they're getting let go.
Yeah.
They're getting let go. They're getting fired. Right. So I was going to give an example of, I had written something about when under stress, we have, okay. So when people who have good maturity here, let's just put this in context. When they're under stress, they have coping and awareness skills and the effect of how they are on others. And they will touch on that with people. They will talk about how their reaction is. They will talk about the impact on them, and they will be able to be relatable, which is how people take responsibility and accountability for the behavior, which is why it doesn't happen again.
That requires self-awareness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, an emotionally immature person or a fractured person is usually a responder that's really rigid, very stuck in distortion. They will go into that, denial, and the quality of the person will be variable because it will be only in an effort to make themselves feel better. They don't do things to make you feel better that are genuine. They do it in an effort to make themselves feel better, to sort of squash everything for like the next pattern reset. So some people can be on a month reset. Some people are on every 4-day reset. Some people are on every every other day resets, because the emotionally immature person will not look at you and say, I take accountability, I take responsibility, and actually do the 4 parts that come with that I've talked about. They'll do 1 or 2, which are just enough to suffice it to get the person who's not savvy enough yet to just buy in, because what they're doing is they're just washing over the surface to get the person just to comply, become complicit, to say, oh, it's no big deal, it's okay. But the more you do that and the more you comply and become complicit, then the pattern gets so embedded into the relationship or into the work environment that it's really hard to undo. So the awareness is missing from that person. The self-reflection is missing from that person and how they're affecting other people. And so it just doesn't move unless you, as the outside person with the observing, with the objective and subjective ability to look at this, you are the one that's going to be responsible for taking on you, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you spot a person who has this emotional immaturity?
It's when you're rolling your eyes.
Well, that's actually one of the things, right? Yeah. I mean, that's really, when you
find yourself rolling your eyes.
Right. So emotionally immature people initially are very hard to spot. So don't kick yourselves, because they're unless they're full blown like narcissistic personality disorder, or they have a lot of emotional intelligence on the surface looking, right? They're very difficult to just spot. So don't beat yourself up if you're like, oh my God, I got myself stuck. And because they're super hard to spot, because they're charming, they're smart, and they know what to do to get you into the thing, right? And we're drawn into being with people, especially in dating. Workforce, it's not as much. That's one of the reasons why people do like panel interviews and stuff like that, because you get a lot of people looking at the whole thing. But in general, in like dating or in relationships,
so that's all show.
It's all show.
Interview and dating is all show.
Right. So I had the supervisor, that God rest his soul again, who told me the thing about narcissistic people, which I live to this day of like, that's my key. I don't even have to do a diagnostic. I'm just like, oh, I know. Right. He also said, that you're with, and I have at least 2 examples in my own life where I'm like, not at least, I have 2 definite examples in my life where this rings true. And when I heard it, I'm like, oh yeah. So I have a colleague in my life that said, how you spot an emotionally immature person and a narcissistic person in a relationship? I'm like, no, tell me. And he goes, they ask you for money and you give it to them, and you don't realize until afterwards that you just fed them, like you gave them the money, you lent it to them, but you're never getting it back, and they will continue to come back, and they will assume that you are going to continue to pay for them. And he and I had this long discussion like a few years ago about like the fact that, of course, they will assume that you will keep paying. They will act as if that their acts of service for you are equivalent to the things that you're doing for them financially. This happens to women all the time in relationships. I see it more and more about, how to get women out of these relationships where they've been financially sunk because the emotionally immature man in the relationship, sorry that I'm keeping it very heterosexual right here, but the man in the relationship really feels that somehow, because they were so damaged in childhood, they are deserving of this. They're supposed to be given this. That it's the woman's. It's like, where did this come from? Right. But my colleague and I had this great conversation. He goes, once you give a man who's on the psychopathic, like pathological line money, then there's you're in for trouble.
Yep.
And I wish more people knew that, it's not the same for women and people, because I know I'm going to get like, well, what women do. Socialized women are still in that position of like, people, you get in a relationship and it's a man takes you out to dinner and you open the door and you do like, it's not typical for a woman, even though, it doesn't make it right or wrong necessarily, but it's just not typical for you to be the person who like pays for everything and does all those things and then expected to do that. Right. That usually falls in line with that emotionally immature person that now is, they were taught at childhood from their parents that it's the mother who takes care of these things. So especially if you grow up in an alcoholic home and you have a dad that's an alcoholic or in addiction, if the mother's always taking care of things, you're going to expect and grow up to have a female take care of you, because you're always looking for someone to take care of you because you've never been able to learn how to regulate yourself. So that's a big piece of that, right? And
by the way, this can translate beyond money to favors. It doesn't necessarily have to be money. Just acts
of doing for them, yes, all those things, right? But money's one of the big keys there, and that's one of the flags for you, is that,
but there are a lot of corollaries to money.
There are a lot of corollaries, but it's just, I just love that when he said that, he's like, how you can tell you happens when you lend them money. So how do you spot them? Again, so you're responding to their charm. You respond to attention. They give you good attention. You're responding to their social facility over time. They're really good at socializing, getting you into like things that maybe you wouldn't normally have. And then unfortunately, then you see it start unraveling. Like once you're in it, like you spot it by seeing it unravel, because now you can see how they treat others.
Yep.
Right? They're going to treat others really well. And then they're going to stop treating you that well.
Yep.
But they're going to still continue to treat others well. So they're going to be all those things that they were to you. You're old news. You're not novel anymore. You're not the shiny object.
Your attachment is paid for.
Your attachment is now paid for. And now you're like stuck. Not yes, but no. But now you're watching it. You can like watch on the outside while they do exactly what they did to you, to other women or to other people, to get them in. Mm-hmm. And it's also one of those things when you're with those types of people, I'm just thinking of an example. Like those are the people that you end up going, they don't end up having a lot of friends. Like, I know people that I've seen, I'm like, oh yeah, I would never be friends with them for very long, because they tap you out. They just, you can just tell
they're social, but
they're social,
establishing relationships.
But their establishment
limited.
Of relationship is really limited, and and it's hard because you can start seeing the qualities of the I call it the ick. The ick comes with it, like the grandiosity and the over the top. It becomes too much sometimes, and it's like, okay, I've had enough of that, right? And they don't do well when they don't get what they want. So you can spot them when you start seeing that, like, again, if a person's temper tantruming, if a person's not getting what they want and how they want it and how they feel it, and you're countering that and how they see how it should be and they see how it should go and they see what they think they're owed, they will direct it back at you, and they don't care about you. They really don't care about you unless you comply, but they'll deny that they're doing that.
Yeah.
So they'll crazy make you. And
well, they don't realize they're doing that in a lot of ways.
Some do, some don't. Yeah. I get that question a lot, is like, is the person doing it consciously or are they doing it not consciously? I think many times people are doing it consciously because they know, because it's a skill that has become so honed, so maneuvering, that they know how to do it and they know how to place it properly. And then there's people that do it, obviously sometimes it's just automatic and it just comes that way. But unless you comply with their needs, their temper tantrum will continue. They will silent treatment you. They will be disdainful. They will be contemptuous. They will be withdrawn. They will restrict you from like love, affection, all those things, because that's what happened to them. And they don't, and until a person looks at that for themselves and how that happened and feels the feels for that, they will never change. So what people will say, is this person ever going to change? I'm like, no.
Yeah.
It's very unlikely that they're going to change. And if you expect them to change, you're, because a lot of times you can't disentangle yourself or you can't get unenmeshed, right? You're enmeshed in this. You can't get unenmeshed in some situations. So you have to learn how to set your own boundary for yourself. And it's an inner boundary. It's my personal inner boundary of how to manage being in this so that you don't get more damaged. Right. And so, when you, so that goes to, so when you marry someone like that, it's a hard road. Now you don't know that at the beginning,
right?
But the hard road comes when you have someone in your office. It's the same thing. It's a hard road because now you got to go on, you strike one rule, strike two rule, like and then you have to be careful because then if they have like a disability, like it's a whole different thing, right? So you have the same kind of thing. But if you have the hallmark characteristics of these things, or you see people with the hallmark characteristics of all those, 4 or 5 things I just gave you, you have trouble. It's trouble in front of you. And it's hard on a partner. It's hard on a work environment, and it's hard on a relationship. It's hard on a wife, a girlfriend, it's very difficult on them. And when the person in that hard relationship and it's spelling trouble refuses to talk to you, like there's people that will say like, I'm not talking about this, it's just ridiculous, those kind, right? They're passing you off. Any normal response that you could give, they will react to make sure that they can shut you down to stop it from happening. And you see that all the time in like the writings of case studies and literature of like abusive relationships. You'll have a healthy, normal person trying to have like a rational, in the moment conversation about the content, and an emotionally immature person is in the reactive mode. And unless you're complying and agreeing with what they feel and say, they will say anything to get you to stop, including walking away from you for hours, days on end, even. It's very controlling. And we emotionally end up taking, and if you want to be in that relationship, a lot of times you emotionally end up taking care of that person. You emotionally like come to their rescue, and it's exhausting. I have people that will say, I'm exhausted doing this. And it's mind numbing. It's, in short, people just say it's abusive. It is. It's abusive. It's completely abusive. But what people do in relationships is they'll chalk it up to other things, especially initially, as like, oh, well, the person had a bad day. They have a hard time. They were raised this way. It's going to take time for them to change. But no, it's a lifelong pattern that unless a person goes back and looks at and does work with someone, a life coach or something, on the fact that they're they were emotionally left behind, they were neglected, they were damaged, and they built a whole life around just feeling and reacting instead of being in reality. All their egocentrism is just going to sit there and be there.
All right, you've identified on a few occasions here throughout the show, and you get me nervous a little bit because it's a technique that I use. I think it's a technique that I use, and maybe I'm emotionally immature. But a lot of times I will work out a conversation in my head beforehand and just decide I'm not going to continue with that conversation. You're allowed to think what you think, and because I know if I engage. In a lot of cases, I know if I engage, I know where it's going to go. So I'm not willing to go there. So
that is not. So I will allay your fears. That's setting an inner boundary. That's a technique that we'll get to. I don't know if we'll get to it today, but we will next week for sure. But that's actually a technique of doing an inner boundary. You're not going to engage further to amplify the problem. You might engage in a healthy way of, I love you. It's, what, I want to just stop. I want to just be at ease. Can we whatever you do to say, whatever, but you're not just abruptly withdrawing, I would assume.
No.
And being like, I'm going to swear, fuck you.
No.
I'm out.
No.
Right. I'm allowed to say that.
Yeah. You're allowed to say that.
Okay. I was like, I can say
no,
that.
I don't do that.
Right. But that's so if you are inner boundary going, this is not worth the fight. And you had the inner objective thought of, it's better to understand. Understanding is love. It's better to understand and have love than pretending to understand only to have reaction, to then shut it down, to have someone comply, to be able to shut it down because you're training the person to want you to want to take care of you. That's a different thing. You're setting an appropriate inner boundary by being like, I don't think this is really worth this at this point to do this in your head.
It's a social media technique that I learned that I had to do.
Right.
And I'm using it in life now. It's like, I could engage,
right,
but I know where it's going,
right,
and it's going to be useless, and it's going to take time, and my mental energy. I get stingy about my mental energy.
And that's a healthy thing to do. And it's not that you're and I want to make sure I'm clear. You're not saying you're shutting the person out. You're just saying you're just not going to perpetuate something because you don't need to react to it, because you know that you can just move forward and just be in relation to the person, not continue this
it's
crazy.
okay that they're there.
Right.
I'm going to be where I am. And
right. Like they have their thought, I have my thought, but we're not going to end up fighting about it and you having a meltdown and kicking and screaming in the corner.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Big difference.
You and I do it all the time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that's having an inner boundary.
Yeah.
That's just being able to say, I respect you, you respect me, or I love you and you love me. And then we can have better conversations at other times. People can even table it and be better down the line. But it's not tabling it by control. It's not tabling it because you have hurt feelings and therefore you control it by shutting it down and saying, or walking away from someone and abandoning them.
I'm trying to do it before I get there.
Right. You're right. Well, because you're having self-reflection, you're having empathy, you're having all the hallmark signs that people that are emotionally immature don't have. You just described literally a perfect way of handling a situation, so that you can stay connected and intimate, so that you don't lose the connection. This is not what emotionally immature people do. Yeah. They blow the connection up and then expect, and they'll say, no, I don't expect. They expect that you will fall in line and then take care of them because they hurt more than you hurt. They're more important than you're important. Their thing is more, it's egocentric. It's all about them.
Yeah.
Right. So yours is good.
Yeah.
So I hope that I gave you
fine. You're scaring me.
I was trying not to scare you.
No, I understand.
So,
because I'm questioning myself.
Right. Well, this is good. You should question yourself. But I'm giving you at least what you've given me, the blessing of the cross over you on that one.
Excellent.
All right. So did I help you there?
Yes, you did.
Okay. So I know I'm going to have someone back up on my show. I just want to get a few more in because I've got lots more. And I want to see, Kate wrote, perception controls someone's reality, but they are so stuck in their ways and their egotistical mindset and behavior that an individual's perception is a reality and the reality only. Yes.
Yeah.
That's yay. Yes. Right. And that goes to the whole thing I'm saying about it's just emotional.
But it's back to the ability, regulating is the ability to understand that your perception isn't always reality.
Right.
And they might be two separate things.
Right. And
they usually are two separate things.
And an emotionally immature person, their perception is usually not right on at all. It's so skewed, but they're so wed to it.
But they're fish in water. They don't understand they're in the water. They don't understand that they're laboring under their perception.
Well, they're the fish that should be in the water, but in my mind, they're out on the beach flailing, dying and sucking for air.
They think they're in the water.
Well, they think they're in the water because they're happy, right? But in fact, they're sucking air and dying. They're drowning because they have no other fish in the sea to help them, because they're on their own.
But it's about questioning your perceptions.
Right. But people don't do that. Well, lots of people do, but these people don't do that. They don't question the perception. They question they question your perception. Right. You're off. You're wrong. I don't see it that way. I might agree a little bit, but not really, because they'll only agree with anything that doesn't really hurt them because the guard is up so hard. Right. So how do you get out of this? Disentangling, right? Or getting out of this. Disentangling is really hard. And the quality of having an interpersonal relationship is really heavily weighted on this. And a lot of this concept comes from a couple different writers that I have been talking about in my classes for years, but also recently just reading all these concepts. And I've talked about all these concepts, but I'm just kind of putting them all together now. First of all, this is a common thing. We see it all the time. So it's not just in I'm working on today relationships and whatever, but you see this immature personhood in everyday life right now. You see it all the time, right?
I think it's exponentially increasing too.
And
I believe it's generational.
Right. And I think it is. And emotionally, emotionally stabilizing this type of person, you have to figure out where the self-esteem plays a role. And unfortunately, the system of a person like this doesn't have self-esteem. Their self-esteem is really, really poor. And they'll blame the world around them for that. I can't find out who I am. I don't know which way is up. I'm always unhappy. Right. Because they weren't taught, because they weren't regulated, and they weren't shown by healthy parents how to do this. By the time they're 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, their self-esteem is in the poop, right? They're right down there in the crapper. And they're just like, well, how do I do that? They're not even looking at that point, especially later in life, how to lift their self-esteem. They're too invested in the complaint about how they don't have any sense of self-worth, or they don't have purpose. Whose fault is that?
Well,
that's not my fault. That's not your fault. That's their problem. It's not a fault thing. It's their problem. It's their thing to fix, instead of temper tantruming every time they don't feel good about someone saying like, hey, put the toilet seat down, or pick up your socks, or could you not do that? Instead of losing your mind, because those are normal basic requests in life, instead they do, because the self-esteem, which is part of that ego manager, is so damaged and fractured. It can't handle even the slightest thing, because it's interpreted as, I'm bad. I'm being criticized. I can't regulate for that, because it's never enough. You'll hear, oh, I'm just never good enough. Nothing I ever do is good enough. You read anything, these are like quotes directly out of people's mouths across the board that are like this. It's like,
but increasing the self-esteem requires a death of self,
right?
Because the self is based on their low self-esteem. And accepting responsibility for that.
Right. And to be able to sort of
difficult choices,
and to undo it, to then redo it, to have it it's like military, right? You break it down to rebuild it back up. People are afraid to do that. And especially when they don't have support people, and they don't want to be seen. They don't want the curtain to be drawn back. So they won't do it. They'll pretend like they're doing it. I have people come into therapy all the time, and I'll like rip that screen right off, and they'll be but then we're fine, because I know I'm a good support person, and then it's fine. I typically, knock on wood, I don't have people that fall apart and then like don't come back because of that, because I hold the space.
And hopefully they learn that that's not the end of the world.
Right. It's because it's not. But then you've got people that are just like, they're too busy focusing on, other people's problems when they go to therapy, and how do I fix that?
Yeah.
It's like, no, you need to fix you, not.
Oh, you must get that a lot.
Oh,
how do I handle this, as opposed to how do I handle my own problem,
and how do I understand my own problem, right? And so one of the things that comes in with this is that when you're trying to get out of this, right? Oftentimes you're an emotional caretaker for that person. You become the mother that they didn't have usually, or the dad that they didn't have, right? And and they had them, but they failed. They were failures. And the emotional caretaker, and you're their self-esteem booster. So it energy drains you, because instead of taking care of your own self in it, you're constantly there anticipating what's coming next. What's he going to be upset about now? What's the next thing coming? Oh my God. Oh my God.
And it's so, pouring water into a colander because nothing attaches.
Because the attachment has never been made. They don't know how to self-soothe correctly. So they either self-soothe through creating chaos and fights with you, or they self-soothe through other things like food, drinking, drugging, gambling, sex, whatever it is. And they'll turn to you to regulate their own emotions, like a little kid would to their parent, because they never had it as a little kid. And in order to get that better, a person has to go to therapy or a relationship coach to be able to work on that piece. If they don't, it's like a done kaput thing. And so a child, when they internalize from a good loving parent, they will feel loved, and they will have self-esteem, and they will not look to someone else to caretake for them. They will be a equal opportunity caretaker, and they will not suck. I call it soul sucking. They will not soul suck you to death to have that happen. So I have so much more to talk about.
Part two.
And so we will be having a part 2, potentially even maybe another part 3. But I just want really quick. Hi, Ryan, chiming in late. Is there any recommendation for those that want to practice this assertiveness and boundary setting? Holding that ground is difficult, especially when you are unsure of yourself. How do you strengthen these skills outside of the enmeshment? Oh my God. So such a great
next
question.
Week's show.
So it actually is. So if we can capture that question, that is actually the lead in to the beginning of what my next show is going to be about. Exactly that. So Ryan, I can always answer you on the backside, but I'm going to use that as the jump off because that's exactly what I'm going to go into next week. So what a fantastic question. And thank you for everybody that participated today. And I know I'm going to get a lot of good stuff. And there's lots of good reading.
That's why.
Thank you so much. There's lots of good reading out there that's in line with this. A whole bunch of doctors that talk about this exactly. And I just pulled a lot of it together. All right. And you guys have a fantastic week. And I will see you on the backside.